Hey everybody, this is Zui. Today I'd like to share an update to our Mesmer build guide for Dungeons & Dragons with you. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into this. Alright, so first things first, let's talk about gear. I'm using Assassin's or Saphir's armor with Scholar runes. This is the best choice for basically general play. And in my inventory I have a set of basically random stats, a mix of assassins and berserkers in this case, but you can use whatever you want with centaur runes, which is extremely useful for running, as Mesmer doesn't have great swiftness uptime unless you're using the mantra heal in concert with centaur runes. Now you may be thinking, Scholar runes are pretty expensive, I'd like a budget option. So, two budget options that are decent are berserkers, Zoges with eagle runes, or assassins, again, Saphirs with pack runes. I'd say probably go with Assassins with pack runes if I were choosing, didn't already have a set of Berserkers in the bank, just because you can then upgrade it to Scholar runes if you decide you really like Mesmer and you're willing to shell out that extra cash. Alright, moving on from armor, we have weapons. So you're going to want a main hand sword with a sigil of force on it, and then you're going to want offhand swords, foci, and pistols that have 10% sigils on them. So the two you want most are going to be Knight, 10% damage at Knight, and either Frailty or Accuracy. Frailty is going to be better if your party is not at Vuln Cap. Accuracy is going to be better if you are at Vuln Cap. And then in addition to that, you can have whatever you want. Literally, you can go wild. In addition to that, you're going to want Greatsword with 5% and 10% sigil. This is very useful for basically burst rotations, and the knockback on the 5 skill can be useful in some cases, like SCP-3 Dredgecar. In addition to that, you will want a torch. Your torch doesn't have to have any specific sigil on it, you're basically just going to use it for skips. But if you really wanted to put something on there, you could go with Cleansing, Renewal, or Energy. Again, those are all kind of expensive or not that easy to get, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. We're also going to want a staff with a 5% and a 10% sigil. We won't be using this too often, but the Chaos Storm for bursts and multiple target fights isn't bad, and the Phase Retreat isn't bad for helping with our movement. And finally, we're going to want a Scepter. And the Scepter is basically going to come into play in some very niche cases. So if you need a lot of blocks, like let's say you're at My Trin, you're going to stay far away to block shots for your party, you could run a Scepter there, because Scepter has a very low cooldown block on it. Again, it's not optimal, but if you need to do that for your party, you can do that. And the other Scepter that I would suggest is one with the Leeching Sigil. So you can use that to help speed up Jade Maw if your party has already killed all the Colossi. But again, don't really need it. Scepter isn't that useful. Okay. Finally, let's talk about trinkets. So I'm using Berserker's Back, Amulet, and Rings, and then Assassin's accessories. For food, we are going to mainly be using truffle steak. It is the best food for DPS. Yeah, if you think truffle steak's too expensive, you can definitely go with a plate of steak and asparagus, which is just a cheaper version that gives you less power and less precision. Second best food, and the best food for reflect damage, ignoring percent modifiers, is bowl of curry butternut squash soup. It's a lot more expensive than truffle steak, not much different in terms of overall DPS, so it can be useful in some situations where you're doing a lot more reflects. Definitely better than truffle steak, but again, it's more expensive and it's kind of niche. We have Dragon's Breath buns. So if you're killing a lot of mobs, you can use one of these quickly and then swap back to truffle steak or whatever you want. And that's pretty good stat boost. We have bowl of asparagus and sage salad. This is actually a lower tier version of bowl of seaweed salad, which is a 10% modifier. Another version of this is Experimental Remnant, which you can get in Cursed Shore by doing some events. This is the best food for pure reflect damage, provided you're moving around anyway. but it doesn't really benefit your phantasms, so your direct damage is going to be a lot lower than it would be if you were running Truffle Steak or Curry Butternut Squash Soup. For casual runs, we have Berry Ghosts, some Lifesteal, some Precision, and you also have Berry Pies and Candy Dragon Rolls, which are the exact same thing. For utility, the best option we have is Slaying Potions. They're pretty cheap, and they're quite good, so you should probably use them. When Slaying Potions aren't applicable, we want more precision, we can use Master Maintenance Oils. Again, there are cheaper versions of these. These are pretty expensive. And if we don't have an actual potion and we want extra power, we can use Superior Sharpening Stones. And finally, we have Scale Venom. Scale Venom isn't all that useful. It doesn't work on our phantasms. But if you really value weakness on a foe, and let's say there isn't an applicable Slaying Potion, Scale Venom's pretty good. It's also pretty cheap, and the duration isn't that long. So that's not a bad choice, really. Okay, so let's talk about skills. So first we have Mantra of Recovery. Mantra of Recovery is a great heal. Traded with Harmonious Mantras, you can get a nice DPS boost. And you can also use it with your Centaur rune set to get swiftness boosts. It's a pretty solid heal. Another great heal is Signet of the Ether. So you can trade it and get distortion from it. You can refresh your phantasm cooldowns with it, so it can be very important in our rotation, or some rotations. And it's a pretty nice heal. Alright, so moving on from the heal skills, let's get on to the utility skills. So, first thing we've got is Signet of Inspiration. It's fairly useful for running, just because it can give you some extra swiftness too. You will have perma-swiftness with Centaur runes and your mantra heal, but it can be nice. And it's also useful if your party isn't getting full might and good fury uptime at the start of fights, for example. Wouldn't say I'd take that often, because you can have a trait that when you summon a phantasm, it casts this, but it's a niche skill that you might want to know about. Signet of Midnight. So, with that distortion sharing trait that I currently have on, Signet of Midnight is extremely useful. You can use it like a Guardian uses Aegis to grant distortion to your party, which is pretty cool. And it can also be useful in trash fights where you really, really, really need the extra blinds. Again, it's not all that great. It's nowhere near as good as, say, Sandstorm from an Elementalist or Smokescreen from a Thief, but it's not terrible. Alright, so now we go to our mantras here. So, Mantra of Concentration can stun break, grant stability. Again, anytime you need stun break, this is quite useful. Same for granting party stability. It's not quite as good as Guardian Stability Access, but it is still quite good. And with Harmonious Mantras, it can give us a DPS boost when we use it. Mantra of Resolve, same idea, but it cures conditions. And with Harmonious Mantras, we get that DPS boost. Mantra of Distraction. So, daze your target, it's a great interrupt. And Harmonious Mantras, it'll give us a DPS boost. Power Block, it'll do damage when we interrupt. And if our target's skill has a cooldown, it'll actually disable that skill for 15 seconds. So this can be extremely powerful on skills that might have a cooldown. You can really keep your enemy from using that again for a long time. So one example is the Risen Priest of Melandru in a Raw P4. He's got a very powerful melee explosion that basically knocks you back and deals a ton of damage. You can power block that, and he won't use it for a while. Now we're on to Mantra of Pain. This one deals damage when you activate it, and again with Harmonious Mantras, it will also boost your damage by a certain percent, so it's pretty good. Okay, so moving on here, we have Blink. So Blink is one of the really good skills for Mesmer, because you can combo it with Portal and get people to other locations much faster than normal, especially if you're blinking up an obstacle, for example, and there's a path, right? So, worst case scenario can move you 1200 range in terms of what you would walk, but hey, if there's something 1200 range above you that you'd have to walk maybe 4,000 units to get there, you can just blink right up and drop a portal. Quite good. We have Illusion of Life. This is a pretty niche skill, but it can be useful. It's similar to War Banner, and obviously not quite as good, but if there are ads or something people can tag, it's not that bad. Mimic, extremely powerful skill. So this is most often comboed with Blink to get a second Blink, or with Portal here to get another Portal within a short period of time. And again, these are two of the best skills to have as a Mesmer pretty much, and Mimic just lets you use them more. Alright, we have Decoy. Can be useful for skips, otherwise not so much. Phantasmal Disenchanter, if you ever really run out of boon stripping ability, which you shouldn't, you have your auto attack here, you've got a skill on the Greatsword that does it, you've got Null Field, which we'll talk about in a second. Phantasmal Disenchanter might not be a bad idea, but generally speaking, pretty niche. Null Field is a pretty good skill. Not only condition clear, but it strips boons on allies, and you can use it to give super speed to NPCs if you trade it. Very, very powerful. Feedback, probably the most powerful effect in the game. It's instant cast. Dome projectile, so you don't really have to worry about, reflex not working, like you might with your Temporal Curtain, or Shield of the Avenger, which trolls you all the time on Guardian. Again, you can use it to give super speed, but since it's only faux targetable now, probably not as useful as it used to be before in that case. Portal, again, we've talked about this, moving allies from one place to another. Oftentimes, the value of having a Mesmer is they can run ahead and drop a portal while people are finishing something up, and that will save a lot of time off the run. You can have portals that save a minute off of a run, which is very cool. Or in more casual situations, you can use Portal to get people past skips that they couldn't normally do, or that they're having a lot of trouble with. You can just run over, do them, and give them a Portal. Finally, we have Veil. Veil's a pretty useful skill as well. Again, great for skipping. You can use it to give super speed on NPCs like you can with Portal, but that's generally not the best use of it. And you can use Veil with Mimic too, so if your party's having a hard time with a skip, let's say in CM, you don't have a Thief, you might use a Veil and you can mimic it and do it again, as an example. Alright, now for our elite skills, we have Time Warp, extremely powerful skill, longest lasting source of quickness in the game, and it also does slow. Quite good. And Mass Invisibility, pretty useful for skips. Outside of that, not super useful, obviously, but it gives a lot of stealth to your party. And then Signet of Humility, it's a cool skill, but it's really not that useful in PvE, so I wouldn't recommend using it. Okay, moving on to traits. So for our standard DPS Mesmer traits, we're going to have Domination, Dueling, and Illusions. In Domination, we're going to take Empowered Illusions. We're going to take Blurred Inscriptions, or Furious Interruption. So Blurred Inscriptions, pretty useful for Distortion on a Signet, and it reduces Signet recharge. And Furious Interruption, if you have an Interrupt and you're fighting some trash mobs, for example, it can be pretty good for the extra quickness. And then we have either Mental Anguish or Power Block. So if you're interrupting things, Power Block is extremely good. You can disable a skill that has a cooldown for 15 seconds, which can be extremely, extremely good in certain boss fights, for example. And otherwise, we can run Mental Anguish. So Shatter skills doing more damage, not so bad, because we're going to shatter at the end of the fights if we can. And then for our minor traits here, Inflict Vulnerability when you're up to foe, Dazing a foe applies vulnerability and deal more damage for each stack of vuln. Not too bad. Not super duper important though. Alright, so dueling. We're going to choose Phantasmal Fury. We're going to choose Fencer's Finesse. And we're going to choose Harmonious Mantras. Now, Phantasmal Fury. Phantasms get Fury. That's pretty good. They'll do more damage that way. The Stacking Ferocity buff from Fencer's Finesse with the sword is quite good. And Harmonious Mantras, an extra major activation is good. And the 3% damage boost for 8 seconds when we use one is also quite good. For our minor traits, we've got Critical Infusion. So, Vigor when you crit, and you'll crit a lot. Pretty good. Get Vigor about half the time. Really not bad. Bleeding on critical hits. Adds a little bit extra damage, but not that important. And Master Fencer. So you get Fury when you strike a foe below 75% health. This basically means you're going to have Fury an entire fight once your foe is below 75% health, no matter what your party's doing, which is pretty good. Alright, finally, we're down into illusions. So we've got Compounding Power. So more illusions you have, the more damage you do. We've got Phantasmal Haste. Phantasmal Haste, also pretty good. Phantasms attack more often. And finally, we've got Master of Fragmentation. So it just gives our Shatter skills a bit of improvement. Makes our Distortion reflect projectiles, not bad. Makes our Mind Rack have a higher crit chance, not bad. And then makes Diversion hit more foes, again, not bad. And we might want to take Ineptitude if we're engaging in difficult trash fights where we might not have enough lines, but for the most part, Master Fragmentation is your go-to. And we're going to want to run a sword and a focus generally with this kind of build. For Reflex and Distortion sharing, we're going to want to swap Dueling out for Inspiration. Now, in Inspiration, we're going to want to choose either Medic's Feedback or Persisting Images. Medic's Feedback is pretty useful if you have either downed ally or downed NPCs or something that you can revive, get extra feedback. Very good for reflections. And otherwise, you can just go with Persisting Images. Your Phantasms have more health, which isn't bad. They'll live a little bit longer. Alright, so for this next one, we're going to want Warden's Feedback. So this just makes our focus skills reflect projectiles, which means our Wardens reflect, and our Temporal Curtain will reflect. Just as a note about Temporal Curtain, it's not very tall, so some projectiles will just shoot right over it. So that can be something you can watch out for. And then finally, we're either going to want to go with Illusionary Inspiration or Temporal Enchanter. So Illusionary Inspiration is that trait I talked about earlier that summons Signet of Inspiration, or casts Signet of Inspiration, however, when you use a Phantasm. Pretty good, especially if your party isn't starting a fight with a lot of Might or Fury uptime, because Might and Fury are very powerful boons in increasing your party's DPS. And Temporal Enchanter makes your Glamour skills last longer, super speed when you use them, quite good, and resistance isn't bad either. If it's a very condition-heavy fight, that could be somewhat useful. But for the most part, you're going to do it for the Glamour skills last longer, or for the super speed on NPCs. Alright, that's basically the change for our Reflection build and Distortion sharing. And just to go over the minor traits here. So, cast Power Cleanse when you use a healing skill. So that is basically our Mantra of Resolve that clears conditions. It's using the charge of that, but not the actual charge from the utility skill when we use our heal. So it combos pretty well with our heal skill, especially if we're, say, running the Mantra heal instead of the Signet heal. But generally with the Reflect build, you will probably want the Signet heal so you can do 2 Wardens, which we'll talk about that more in the rotation section. Inspiring Distortion. This is the trait that copies distortion to nearby allies. It only has a radius of 300, but that's actually pretty good. If you notice, Time Warp is just a little bit larger than that. It's 360 radius. So it's a pretty decent range. So if everyone's in the lead, let's say with you, you can cast that and give them all distortion. And Healing Prism. When you heal yourself, nearby allies are also healed, and you get extra healing power for each illusion you control. This isn't terribly useful, but it's also not that bad. The extra healing power obviously doesn't matter much because healing power scales poorly, but the extra heal on other people can't really complain too much. Alright, finally, we're going to talk about a running build. So this is useful for skips, primarily. So the most important component of this is going into chaos. You're thinking, what's good in chaos? Well, prismatic understanding is really good. Increases your stealth duration for all your skills, basically. So the duration increases 100%. So this Mass Invisibility Elite skill goes from 5 seconds to 10 seconds with it on. Veil goes from 2 seconds. Oh, I'm sorry. 2 seconds to 4 seconds, right? The current duration is 6. Okay, so that's actually pretty good. Your Torch Stealth will go from 3 seconds to 6 seconds. Also quite good. So what other skills do we want to take in Chaos? Well, we can take Master of Manipulation here. It's not really very useful, but it's minorly useful, I guess. And then we can take either Mirror of Anguish or Chaotic Dampening. So Chaotic Dampening gives us Chaos Armor, and yeah, when we use that, we get protection, and staff skills recharge a little faster while you have Chaos Armor. So you can swap to staff, you give yourself Chaos Armor, and then use Phase Retreat. And Phase Retreat is like a teleports us backwards, but we can do About Face and use it then. So that can be useful. And then we've got Mirror of Anguish. So basically, when we are disabled, we disable whoever disabled us. So if you get disabled during a skip, maybe the foe that disabled you will get disabled. Not terribly useful, but it might prevent you from dying. So might as well stick something on there instead of just going here and saying, oh, I'll just use PU. Alright, so this is the core of the running build, is just going into chaos, but other lines also have useful stuff. So dueling, harmonious mantras can be useful, right? So that gives us extra charges, let's say on our healing mantra, so we can use more with Centaur runes. Okay, and that's basically it for useful stuff in dueling with this build. So there's illusions. So we have the Pledge. Torch skills remove conditions and recharge faster while you're in stealth. That can be pretty useful. You can get another Torch skill off quickly, or more quickly, and stealth again. So that's not so bad. Domination. So go back to Domination. Blurred inscriptions here, decent. You can get distortion while you're skipping if you need it. So you can put on, say, Sign the Midnight for that. That's pretty good. And then we can go to Inspiration here. And in Inspiration, Temporal Enchanter might not be bad. Super Speed, pretty good. Obviously, everyone likes Super Speed. And that's about it. Temporal Enchanter also increases your portal duration so that instead of 10 seconds after you use it, you actually get 12 seconds after you use it. As you see, it's now 12 seconds long. So this exit portal is going to be there for 12 seconds instead of 10, which is not bad at all. It gives your team a little bit more time to get through your portal. Alright, so that is it for traits. Next we're going to move on to rotations. Alright, so I'm going to talk about some rotations now before I actually show you them in action in Heart of the Mist. So The best rotation for fights that last 15 seconds and longer is going to be sword, and then you basically start on a pistol here, and then you use your duelist, you drag your sword on after your duelist is cast, right? And then you use your swordsman, and then you go to your focus phantasm, or you can drag your focus on instead of the sword. Either way, that is going to be your best DPS in those cases. It can be tricky to pull off in some encounters, though. So, next thing is just sword focus with Ether Signet. That is the second best in 15 plus second fights, and it can be better in less than ideal conditions, such as if your phantasms are dying all the time. And it's also going to be the best if you're going to need 2 wardens to start up. So let's say you're using the reflect build, you really need some good reflective time. This is the rotation to do. But obviously, if you don't need that, you don't want to use 2 wardens at the start, as I'll explain in the actual rotation video. And the text guide will explain in more detail. You can also use the pistol instead of focus if for some reason you just want to run Signet of Ether and don't want to mess around with swapping weapons mid-combat. And you don't need reflex from the focus, but you don't ever want to take that sword off. The sword is just too good with Fencer's Finesse. Alright, so for fights that are between 11 and 15 seconds, that sword focus build with Ether Signet is the best. And pistol swapping off that instead of focus for a little bit extra DPS, that doesn't work for this time range. So if you think your fight's going to be in 11 to 15 second time range, just use Ether Signet with sword focus. So for fights that are less than 11 seconds, we're actually going to run focus offhand, like sword focus, right? And then our greatsword. And this is going to give us the best burst. So basically, the way this one works is we'll use our Phantasmal Warden at the start of the fight, and before it attacks at all, we'll very quickly swap our weapons and use our Greatsword burst skills. Okay? And then once we kind of run out of Greatsword burst skills, we're going to swap back and sword auto attack. And again, this is much better than anything else for fights that are 11 seconds or less. The second best for fights in this range is sword focus with Ether Signet, but it's very distantly second best. So if you don't really want to learn multiple rotations, you can just use sword focus Ether Signet rotation. But it's really not something I would recommend doing. I would recommend learning some different rotations, practicing them, so you can use the best thing for the situation that you're in. Because playing a Mesmer, a lot of it's about situational awareness. Does my team need stability? When do they need stability? Should I run ahead and give a portal? When should I break off? You know, things like that. So just using the right weapon sets and the right rotation for each fight, I think is part of that. Alright, so now I'm going to actually show you some examples of the rotations. Alright, so the first rotation I'm going to cover is offhand pistol to offhand sword plus focus. I will not be using any of my charged mantras here. You should do that for extra DPS when you're running harmonious mantras. You should always do it for mantra pain. But these other ones are kind of situational. So if you really need to interrupt something, don't just spam it, use it for the interrupt. If you need to clear a condition, like a specific condition, like say confusion, don't just spam it, use it for the con declare. And so on. So I'm not going to use them in the rotations here today, just so that there's no confusion, or, oh, you just always use this then. No, use it when it makes sense to use it. Alright, so let's start. Now at this point, we would shatter our phantasms when the fight is about over. So, let's say we just shatter. Bam. Done. Okay, so for my second rotation that I'm going to cover, offhand sword plus offhand focus with ether signet. So let's begin. And at this point, we would just want to resummon phantasms if they die. We can swap back here to do, let's say, a temporal curtain if we need the pull or whatever, or we need to summon another warden for additional reflex. And then, towards the end of the fight, we would shatter. Right, so the final rotation I'm going to show is the Greatsword Burst rotation. There are two other variants of this rotation that are covered in the text guide that I will not be covering in the video guide because they're kind of advanced and fairly tricky to pull off, as well as kind of niche when you'd want to use them. So if you are interested in that, please check out the text guide. Otherwise, here we go. Then we would shatter when our target is almost dead. Alright, that about covers it. Thank you guys for watching. Feel free to ask any questions either in the comments section on the DnT forums and this thread, or in-game. Again, thanks. Bye.